In the streets, a crown is made of blood, and he wore it until the weight crushed him. In the suffocating heat of South Jamaica, Queens, New York, 1960, Kenneth McGriff was born into a world that had already decided his fate. The projects rose like tombstones against the sky, casting shadows over cracked sidewalks where children played and dealers worked. His neighborhood wasn't just poor, it was forgotten, a place where the American dream came to die in slow motion. The government didn't care. The police didn't protect. The schools didn't teach hope. So the streets became the classroom, and survival became the only curriculum that mattered. Kenneth's mother worked multiple jobs, her hands worn and her eyes tired, trying to keep her son from the gravity of the streets. His father was a shadow, present but absent, another casualty of a system designed to break black men before they could stand. Young Kenneth watched it all, the junkies nodding off in stairwells, the dealers counting money under streetlights, the violence that erupted like thunder without warning. He was a quiet boy, observant, intelligent, his eyes absorbing everything while his mouth stayed shut. He understood early that in Queens, you were either predator or prey. There was no middle ground, no safe zone, no mercy for the weak. By the time he was a teenager, Kenneth had made his choice. He wasn't going to be another statistic, another body in a cheap casket, another name forgotten by morning. If the world was a jungle, he would become its apex predator. If the streets were a chessboard, he would learn every move before his enemies even knew the game had started. His nickname came naturally, Supreme. Not because he gave it to himself, but because everyone who knew him understood. This wasn't just another kid from the projects. This was someone different, someone dangerous, someone destined to either rule or burn everything trying. The late 1970s in New York City were pure chaos. The Bronx was burning literally. Crime rates exploded. The crack epidemic was just beginning to whisper its arrival, and the old heroin trade was evolving into something bigger, darker, more profitable. Kenneth McGriff saw the opportunity before most. While other dealers were content with street corners and petty cash, Supreme was thinking bigger. He wasn't just selling stuff, he was building an empire. In 1981, Supreme formed the Supreme Team, and it wasn't just a gang, it was a corporation disguised as a crew. He recruited carefully, choosing loyalty over flash, discipline over ego. His headquarters was the Baisley Park Projects in South Jamaica, a fortress of brick and concrete where his word was law. The Supreme Team controlled the dope and powder flow through southeast Queens like oil through a pipeline, every transaction monitored, every corner claimed, every competitor crushed. But Supreme's genius wasn't just violence, it was organization. He structured his operation like a Fortune 500 company. There were lieutenants who managed territories, enforcers who handled discipline, runners who moved product, and accountants who cleaned the money. Everyone had a role. Everyone knew the consequences of failure. He paid his soldiers well, better than any legitimate job they could ever get, creating loyalty through economics as much as fear. A kid making minimum wage flipping burgers would see his friend pulling in thousands a week working for Supreme, and the choice became obvious. The streets were recruiting stations, and poverty was the best advertisement. The Supreme Team wasn't just selling stuff, they were providing opportunity in a community that had been abandoned by everyone else. That was Supreme's real power. He didn't just control the trade, he controlled hope itself, twisted and dark as it was. Young men joined not just for money but for purpose, for brotherhood, for the chance to be somebody in a world that told them they were nothing. By the mid-1980s, Supreme McGriff was untouchable. His empire stretched across southeast Queens, generating millions annually. The Supreme Team wasn't just a gang, it was an institution, a shadow government that operated with more efficiency than the actual government ever could. While politicians made promises and police turned blind eyes, Supreme provided jobs, protection, and order. His community feared him, yes, but they also respected him. He was one of them, born from the same poverty, raised in the same projects, scarred by the same system. Supreme understood the game better than anyone. He knew that power wasn't just about violence, it was about control. So while his enforcers handled the muscle work, Supreme cultivated relationships with cops, paid off officials, and made sure that anyone who could cause problems was either bought or buried. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. Trials collapsed. He operated in the shadows, rarely showing his face, letting his reputation do the work. The stuff flowed like water. Powder from Colombia, dope from the Golden Triangle, later crystal as the market evolved. The Supreme Team had connections everywhere, from South American cartels to Asian syndicates. from corrupt NYPD officers to politicians who enjoyed the campaign contributions that arrived in unmarked envelopes. The money was astronomical. Millions in cash stacked in apartments, buried in backyards, laundered through legitimate businesses that Supreme purchased like trading cards. But the product wasn't just enriching Supreme, it was destroying his own community. The very neighborhoods he grew up in were now drowning in addiction. Mothers were losing sons to overdoses and gang wars. Children were stepping over needles on playgrounds. The crack epidemic hit Queens like a nuclear bomb, and the Supreme team was ground zero. Supreme saw it, of course. He wasn't blind. But he had made his choice long ago. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. Better to be the king of a dying kingdom than a peasant in someone else's. His soldiers worshipped him. To them, Supreme wasn't just a boss, he was a father figure, a mentor, a god. He provided for their families when they went to prison. He paid for funerals when they died. He settled disputes, enforced rules, maintained order and chaos. In the projects, his word carried more weight than any judge's gavel. That was real power, not the title but the absolute certainty that when Supreme spoke, everyone listened. Supreme's empire wasn't built on love, it was built on fear, calculated and absolute. The Supreme team's reputation was their greatest asset, and Supreme maintained it with brutal efficiency. Crossed the team and you didn't just die, you disappeared. Snitches weren't just killed, their families were erased. Competitors who tried to move into Supreme team territory were found in pieces scattered across the borough, their deaths serving as textbooks for anyone else considering betrayal. There were stories, whispered in hushed tones, about what happened to those who disrespected Supreme. A dealer who skimmed product found himself tied to a chair in a basement, his screams unheard above the bass of a nearby club. A rival who shot at a Supreme team member was discovered days later, his body left in a public park as a message. This is what happens. These weren't just murders, they were performances, theater designed to instill terror and obedience. But Supreme's violence was never random. That was what separated him from common thugs. Every act of brutality served a purpose, sent a message, reinforced the hierarchy. He didn't kill for pleasure, he killed for business. When he ordered a hit, it was strategic, calculated, necessary. And that cold calculation made him even more terrifying. You couldn't predict his rage because it wasn't rage, it was arithmetic. If your death benefited the Supreme team, you were already a corpse walking. His enforcers were legendary, men with names like Prince, Black Justice, and Bimmy, soldiers who carried out Supreme's orders without hesitation or mercy. They moved through Queens like shadows, appearing suddenly to deliver judgment, then vanishing before police could respond. The NYPD knew their names, had files on their activities, but witnesses refused to testify, evidence mysteriously disappeared, and the few cases that went to trial collapsed under the weight of intimidation and corruption. Supreme understood something fundamental about power. It's not enough to be dangerous, you must be perceived as inevitable. His enemies had to believe that resistance was futile, that fighting back would only result in their destruction and the destruction of everyone they loved. And he was right. Most people didn't fight. They submitted. They paid. They obeyed. Because in Queens, Supreme's law was the only law that mattered. But Supreme wasn't satisfied with just controlling the streets, he wanted to control the culture. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, hip-hop was exploding from the underground into the mainstream, and Supreme saw opportunity. The same kids who grew up watching the Supreme team rule Queens were now becoming rappers, producers, executives. They carried the streets with them into the studio, and Supreme's legend became part of the soundtrack. Artists like LL Cool J grew up in the same neighborhood Supreme controlled. The Paisley Park projects weren't just a location, they were a character in the story of New York hip-hop. Supreme became a mythological figure, referenced in songs, respected in the culture, feared and admired in equal measure. He was the real-life Tony Montana, the godfather of Queens, the man who actually lived the life that rappers only performed. Supreme began investing in the music industry, seeing it as both a passion and an opportunity to launder money. He financed projects, supported artists, through parties where street legends and music industry executives mingled. He was building a bridge between two worlds, the criminal underworld and the entertainment industry, creating a pipeline that would later become standard in hip-hop culture. But with visibility came vulnerability. The more famous Supreme became, the more attention he attracted. The feds had been watching the Supreme team for years, building cases, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. And as Supreme's empire grew, so did the list of people willing to testify against him. Success bred jealousy. Power created enemies, And the higher Supreme climbed, the farther he had to fall. In 1987, the hammer dropped. Federal agents, NYPD DA, they came in force, sweeping through Queens like an invading army. Raids hit Supreme Team locations across the borough. Doors were kicked in. Evidence was seized. Bodies were arrested. And at the center of it all was Kenneth, Supreme McGriff, charged with operating a continuing criminal enterprise, the federal government's ultimate weapon against organized crime. The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors presented mountains of evidence: wiretaps, financial records, testimony from former soldiers who had turned informant. They painted Supreme not as a community leader but as a murderer, a terrorist who had poisoned his own neighborhood for profit. The defense argued entrapment, illegal searches, witness coercion, but the evidence was overwhelming. The Supreme Team had been too big, too successful, too visible. They had broken the cardinal rule of the streets: never let them build a case. In 1989, Kenneth McGriff was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His empire, built over nearly a decade, collapsed almost instantly. Without Supreme's leadership, the Supreme Team fractured. Lieutenants fought for control. Territory was lost. The organization that had once operated with military precision descended into chaos. The king was gone and the kingdom burned. But prison wasn't the end of Supreme's story, it was just intermission. Inside, he wasn't a broken man. He was planning, watching, waiting. Because Supreme understood something that most criminals don't. Power isn't about freedom, it's about influence. And even from behind bars, his legend continued to grow. Younger inmates idolized him. Guards respected him. And in Queens, his name still carried weight, still commanded fear, still whispered promises of his return. In 1994, after serving 7 years, Supreme walked out of prison into a world that had changed dramatically. The crack epidemic was waning. Hip-hop had gone mainstream. Queens was different. Gentrification was beginning its slow invasion, the projects were more heavily policed, and the game itself had evolved. But Supreme hadn't changed. He was older, smarter, more cautious, but still hungry. Still Supreme. He couldn't return to the stuff trade directly. The feds were watching, waiting for him to slip. So Supreme did something unexpected. He went legitimate, or at least appeared to. He launched a record label, got involved in music production, networked with industry figures. He positioned himself as a reformed criminal, a street legend turned businessman, living proof that redemption was possible. But the streets don't let go easily. Supreme maintained connections to his old world even as he tried to build a new one. He associated with younger dealers, new crews, the next generation of hustlers who saw him as royalty. And slowly, carefully, Supreme began rebuilding influence. Not the same empire, that was impossible. But something quieter, more sophisticated, more dangerous because it was hidden beneath a veneer of legitimacy. His involvement in hip-hop grew. He connected with artists, producers, executives, people who respected his legend and wanted association with that authenticity. Supreme understood that hip-hop was the new frontier, that the culture had become an industry worth billions, and that someone with his connections and reputation could carve out a powerful position. He wasn't just selling stuff anymore, he was selling image, mythology, the realness that the culture craved. But old habits die hard and old enemies remember. The feds never stopped watching. They knew Supreme hadn't reformed, he had just gotten smarter. And they were building new cases, gathering new evidence, waiting for him to make a mistake. On October 30, 2002, hip-hop lost a legend. Jam Master Jay, the DJ for Run DMC, one of the most influential groups in hip-hop history, was shot and killed in his recording studio in Queens. The murder shocked the music world. Jam Master Jay was beloved, respected, seemingly uninvolved in street politics. His death seemed senseless, tragic, unexplainable. But the streets knew different. Whispers began immediately. Supreme was involved. The motive, according to federal investigators and street sources, was powder, specifically a deal gone wrong. Allegedly, Jam Master Jay had agreed to help distribute powder in the Midwest but backed out, refusing to be part of the operation. Supreme, according to prosecutors, ordered the hit as retaliation and as a message to others. Deals are not optional. For years the case went cold. No arrests. No witnesses. Just rumors and speculation. Jam Master Jay's family grieved publicly while his killers walked free, protected by the same street code that Supreme had enforced for decades. Don't snitch. Don't testify. Don't break the silence. Even in death, Supreme's influence held. But in 2020, nearly 2 decades after the murder, federal prosecutors finally charged 2 men, Ronald Tennard Washington and Carl Little D. Jordan Jr., both with alleged connections to Supreme. The indictment didn't charge Supreme directly with the murder, but his name permeated the case, his presence felt in every line of the accusations. The king's fingerprints were everywhere, even if his hands appeared clean. The Jam Master Jay murder represents the darkest side of Supreme's legacy. The collateral damage of a life built on violence, the innocent lives destroyed by street politics, the culture poisoned by the same forces that claim to represent it authentically. Hip-hop had grown from the same streets that produced Supreme, but it had also been damaged by men like him, figures who blurred the line between reality and criminality until they became indistinguishable. But Supreme's most infamous alleged crime was still to come. In 2000, a film called Crime Partners was released, a low-budget crime drama based on the books by Donald Goines, a legendary street fiction author. The movie was produced by the McGriff brothers, Kenneth, Supreme McGriff and his nephew Gerald Prince Miller, and featured actors from the hip-hop world. It was their attempt to break into Hollywood, to turn street credibility into mainstream success. But during production something went wrong. Rumors spread that one of the investors or associates was cooperating with federal investigators, providing information about Supreme's activities. The streets began talking. Names were whispered. And Supreme, according to prosecutors, decided that someone needed to die. On January 24, 2001, Eric E. Moneybags Smith, a rap associate and alleged informant, was found shot to death in Queens. The murder was brutal, professional, sending a clear message: snitches die. Federal investigators immediately suspected Supreme's involvement, seeing the killing as part of his pattern. Eliminate threats before they can testify, maintain fear through violence, never let betrayal go unpunished. But they couldn't prove it. Not yet. Not until years later, when additional witnesses came forward, when phone records were subpoenaed, when the web of evidence finally became strong enough to support charges. And even then, proving Supreme ordered a murder from a distance, through intermediaries and coded language, required building a case as complex as the organization itself. The irony was brutal. Supreme's attempt to go legitimate through film production had led directly to another murder charge. The movie that was supposed to be his bridge to Hollywood became evidence in a federal murder case. The crown that Supreme had worn for so long was now crushing him under its weight. By the mid-2000s, the federal government had devoted massive resources to bringing down Supreme permanently. They weren't just building a case, they were constructing a monument of evidence. Wiretaps recorded conversations. Surveillance cameras captured meetings. Informants provided testimony. Financial records traced money. The net was closing, slowly but inevitably. In 2005, Supreme was arrested again, this time on charges that could put him away for life. Murder for hire, drug trafficking, money laundering, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The indictment read like a greatest hits of criminal activity, documenting decades of violence and corruption. The feds weren't just prosecuting crimes, they were prosecuting a legacy. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone calls where Supreme allegedly discussed murders. Financial transactions linking him to stuff trafficking. Witnesses testifying about orders given, deaths carried out, terror maintained. The prosecution painted Supreme as the ultimate criminal, intelligent, ruthless, unrepentant, a man who had spent his entire adult life building an empire of suffering. The defense argued entrapment, witness credibility issues, circumstantial evidence. They portrayed Supreme as a reformed man being persecuted for past crimes, a businessman being targeted because of his reputation. But the jury saw through it. They heard the tapes. They saw the evidence. They listened to the witnesses. And they found Kenneth, Supreme, McGriff guilty on multiple counts. In 2007, Supreme was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. The King of Queens was dethroned permanently, locked in a cage designed to hold him until death. No more empire. No more power. No more fear. Just silence, steel, and concrete. But Supreme's story intersected with hip-hop in one more dramatic, violent chapter. His alleged feud with Curtis 50 Cent Jackson, one of the most successful rappers of the 2000s. The conflict, according to various sources, stemmed from 50 Cent's 2000 song Ghetto Churan, a track that detailed the street legends of Queens, including Supreme and the Supreme Team. The song named names, revealed secrets, violated the code of the streets. Don't tell stories that belong to others. Supreme, according to law enforcement and street sources, was furious. The song exposed his organization, romanticized his crimes, and drew attention he didn't want. And in 2000, just months after Ghetto Churan was recorded, 50 Cent was shot 9 times outside his grandmother's house in Queens. The shooting was brutal. Bullets hit his hand, arm, hip, both legs, chest, and face. Somehow, miraculously, 50 Cent survived. He never officially named his attacker, following the same street code that protected Supreme. But everyone knew. The streets talked. The feds investigated. And though Supreme was never charged in the shooting, his alleged involvement became part of hip-hop mythology. The beef between Supreme and 50 Cent became legendary, a real-life example of how street conflicts could explode into violence, even when millions of dollars and mainstream success were at stake. Years later, after Supreme was imprisoned, 50 Cent released songs mocking him, referencing the Supreme team's downfall, celebrating the fact that the king had finally fallen. It was the ultimate disrespect, not just surviving Supreme's alleged hit, but thriving afterward, becoming more successful, more powerful, more famous than Supreme ever was. The student had surpassed the teacher, and the teacher was locked in a cage, powerless to respond. The Supreme 50 Cent saga represents the dangerous intersection of hip-hop and street culture, where authenticity is measured in violence, where reputation requires bloodshed, and where the same stories that build careers can also end lives. Supreme wanted respect in hip-hop, but what he got was infamy, a cautionary tale about the cost of power, the price of violence, and the inevitability of justice, however delayed. Today, Kenneth Supreme McGriff remains locked inside the federal prison system, serving a life sentence that will only end with his death. He's older now, his body worn down by decades of violence and incarceration, his kingdom reduced to a cell, his empire existing only in memory and legend. The man who once commanded armies now commands nothing, his power stripped away by concrete and steel. But even in prison, Supreme's legend persists. Younger inmates know his name, respect his history, study his methods. In hip-hop, he remains a reference point, a symbol of real street power, a ghost that haunts the culture's obsession with authenticity. Documentaries have been made about him. Books have been written. His story has been told and retold, each version adding new layers to the mythology. Supreme's family struggles with his legacy. His children grew up with a father in prison, visits behind glass, phone calls monitored by the government. His mother lived to see her son become both a king and a prisoner, respected and reviled. His community in Queens has moved on. The projects have changed, new generations have taken over, and the Supreme team is mostly remembered by those old enough to have lived through it. Does Supreme have regrets? From prison interviews and statements, he maintains a complex position, acknowledging mistakes but defending his choices, expressing remorse for some victims while justifying the life he lived. He's a man caught between two narratives, the street legend who provided for his community and the violent criminal who destroyed it. Both are true. Both are incomplete. The Supreme team, as an organization, no longer exists in its original form. The structure that Supreme built was dismantled by federal prosecutions, the leadership imprisoned or dead, the territory divided among new crews. But the name persists, carried on by younger generations who wear it like a badge, who claim connection to the legend even if they never met Supreme himself. In Queens, you can still find people who remember when the Supreme team ran everything, when Supreme's word was law, when the projects lived under his shadow. Some remember him fondly, the money he spread around, the jobs he provided, the respect he commanded. Others remember the violence, the bodies, the addiction, the fear that permeated every corner. Both memories are accurate. Supreme was provider and destroyer, protector and predator, king and monster. Hip-hop continues to reference the Supreme team, keeping the legend alive in songs, videos, interviews. Artists from Queens claim connection, even distant association, using Supreme's mythology to boost their own street credentials. The culture that Supreme tried to infiltrate has instead absorbed him, turned him into a character, a story, a symbol of the era when street power and hip-hop were inseparable. Law enforcement points to Supreme as evidence of organized crime's evolution, from Italian mobs to street gangs, from mafia hierarchies to project-based crews. The Supreme team represented a new model of urban criminal enterprise, more flexible, more violent, more integrated into the community it exploited. And that model persists today in cities across America, where young men follow Supreme's blueprint without knowing his name. But beneath the mythology and the music, beneath the legend and the legacy, there's a simpler truth. Kenneth Supreme McGriff left a trail of destruction that can never be fully calculated. How many died because of the Supreme team? How many families were destroyed by the stuff they sold? How many children grew up without fathers because of Supreme's violence? The numbers are impossible to know, but the cost is undeniable. The powder and dope and crystal that flowed through Queens didn't just make Supreme rich, it devastated communities. Addiction destroyed families. Gang violence created orphans. The money that Supreme used to build his empire was extracted from the poorest people in New York, from addicts selling everything they owned for one more hit, from communities already abandoned by the government and further decimated by the stuff trade. Supreme's victims have names, faces, stories. Jam Master Jay had a wife and children who grew up without a father. The countless people murdered by the Supreme team had families who grieved, who still grieve. The communities that Supreme claimed to protect were actually the ones most damaged by his presence. He provided jobs, yes, but they were jobs that required young men to risk death or prison. He provided money, yes, but it was money that came from poisoning their neighbors. This is the cost of empire built on suffering. Supreme's crown was forged from the broken lives of his own people, his throne constructed from the bodies of those who opposed him or simply got in the way. He wanted to be a king and he succeeded. But the kingdom he ruled was hell, and everyone who lived there paid the price for his ambition. But Supreme's story doesn't exist in a vacuum. He wasn't born a monster. He was created by a system designed to produce exactly what he became. The poverty that defined his childhood. The abandonment of his community by government and society. The lack of opportunities, the failing schools, the absence of hope. These weren't accidents. They were policies, choices made by people in power who decided that places like South Jamaica, Queens didn't matter. When legitimate opportunity is systematically denied, illegitimate opportunity fills the void. When the government won't provide jobs, the stuff trade will. When police don't protect communities, gangs will. When the system offers nothing but poverty and prison, young men will choose to rule in the underground rather than suffer in the light. Supreme didn't create these conditions, he exploited them. But they existed long before he was born, and they persist long after his imprisonment. This isn't an excuse for Supreme's crimes. He made choices. He ordered murders. He destroyed lives. He bears responsibility for every body, every destroyed family, every child who grew up in the shadow of his violence. But it's also true that the system that condemned him is the same system that created him. The prosecutors who sent him to prison for life emerged from universities and opportunities that were never available in the projects. The judges who sentenced him grew up in worlds completely alien to South Jamaica. And the politicians who claimed victory when he was convicted did nothing to fix the conditions that produced him. Supreme is in prison. But the Supreme teams of tomorrow are being created right now, in abandoned communities, in failing schools, in neighborhoods where poverty is a life sentence and violence is the only power available. Until that changes, Supreme's story will repeat, with different names and different faces, but the same tragic ending. One of the most troubling aspects of Supreme's legacy is how it's been romanticized, particularly in hip-hop culture. The same industry that claims to represent the streets often glorifies the violence that destroys them. Supreme becomes a hero in songs, a symbol of authenticity, proof that rappers are really about that life. But this glamorization erases the victims, ignores the suffering, and encourages another generation to follow the same path. Young men in Queens and across America hear Supreme's story and see success, power, respect. They don't see the prison cell, the life sentence, the broken families. They see the empire, not its cost. They hear the legend, not the truth. And so they chase the same dream, believing that they'll be smarter, luckier, more careful, that they'll escape the ending that Supreme couldn't. This is hip-hop's complicity in the cycle of violence. When artists glorify street life without acknowledging its costs, when they celebrate criminals as heroes without mentioning their victims, when they use Supreme's name to boost their credibility without discussing his crimes, they become part of the problem. They're selling a fantasy to kids who will pay for it with their lives. Supreme understood this. He tried to leverage hip-hop for legitimacy, to use the culture to launder his reputation. And to some extent he succeeded. His name carries weight in hip-hop even now, decades after his empire fell. But that success is part of his crime, not just what he did to his community, but how he convinced that community to celebrate it. What drives a man like Supreme? What psychological mechanism allows someone to order murders, to flood their own neighborhood with poison, to destroy countless lives in pursuit of power and wealth? These aren't easy questions and any answers are incomplete, but they're worth exploring. Supreme grew up in an environment where violence was normalized, where power was the only currency that mattered, where empathy was a weakness that got you killed. From childhood, he learned that the world was divided into winners and losers, predators and prey, and that survival required ruthlessness. This isn't unique to Supreme. It's the psychology of poverty, the mindset created by systemic abandonment. But Supreme also possessed qualities that elevated him above common criminals: intelligence, charisma, organizational ability, long-term thinking. He wasn't just smart, he was strategic. He didn't just react to situations, he created them. This combination of environmental factors and individual traits produced someone uniquely dangerous. A man who could rationalize extreme violence as necessary business, who could compartmentalize the suffering he caused, who could maintain loyalty through calculated manipulation of fear and reward. Psychologically, Supreme likely viewed himself as a provider and protector, not a villain. In his mind, he was giving opportunities to people the system had abandoned, creating order in chaos, building something lasting in a world designed to crush people like him. This self-perception, common among criminal leaders, allows them to commit atrocities while maintaining a heroic self-image. They're not hurting people, they're helping their community survive. They're not poisoning neighborhoods, they're providing economic opportunity in a system that offers none. This cognitive dissonance is Supreme's real tragedy. He genuinely believed he was doing good even as he destroyed everything around him. And that belief made him more dangerous because it removed guilt, eliminated hesitation, and allowed him to operate with the moral certainty of someone fighting for a righteous cause. He was the hero in his own story, and everyone who opposed him was the enemy. That's how empires of suffering are built, one rationalization at a time. In pursuing power, Supreme lost everything that matters. He lost his freedom, sentenced to die in a cage, his remaining years measured in concrete and steel. He lost his family, his children growing up without him, his relationships reduced to monitored phone calls and supervised visits. He lost his community, the neighborhood he claimed to protect ultimately destroyed by his presence. He lost his legacy, remembered not as a provider but as a predator, not as a king but as a criminal. Was it worth it? From Supreme's perspective, probably yes. He experienced power that most people can't imagine, commanded respect that bordered on worship, built an empire that dominated queens for years. He lived the life he chose, made decisions on his own terms, refused to be a victim of circumstances. In his mind, a life sentence in prison is still better than a lifetime of poverty and powerlessness. But from outside, the calculation looks different. Supreme's empire lasted barely a decade before crashing. His wealth was seized by the government. His organization collapsed. His soldiers either died, went to prison, or betrayed him. Everything he built disappeared like smoke, leaving only ruins and bodies behind. What did he really win? What did any of it accomplish beyond temporary gratification and permanent suffering? The tragedy of Supreme's life isn't just what he did, it's how predictable it all was. From the moment he entered the game, his ending was written. The streets don't have retirement plans. The game doesn't offer happy endings. Every kingpin falls eventually, killed or imprisoned, betrayed or broken. Supreme knew this. Everyone knows this. But they play anyway, convinced that they'll be the exception, that their story will end differently. Supreme wasn't the exception. He never could be. The system doesn't allow exceptions. It grinds everyone down eventually, crushing them under the weight of their own ambitions. And now Supreme sits in prison, a living ghost, a cautionary tale that nobody heeds, proof that even kings die alone in cages. Kenneth, Supreme, McGriff's life is a masterclass in American failure. The failure of systems, communities, individuals, and dreams. His story reveals how poverty creates criminals, how abandonment breeds violence, how the pursuit of power destroys everything it touches. But it also reveals something darker: how easily we glamorize destruction, how quickly we forget victims, how willingly we celebrate monsters if they're entertaining enough. Supreme should be remembered as a cautionary tale, not a hero. His intelligence should have built legitimate businesses. His leadership could have organized communities for positive change. His charisma might have inspired young people toward productive goals. Instead, all those gifts were channeled into destruction, wasted on an empire that harmed everyone it touched, including Supreme himself. The question isn't whether Supreme was smart or strategic or powerful. He was all those things. The question is, what do we do with the thousands of young men growing up right now in the same conditions that produced him? How do we break the cycle that creates Supreme after Supreme, generation after generation, each one following the same path to the same ending? Until we address the systemic issues, poverty, inequality, educational failure, community abandonment, systemic racism, economic hopelessness, Supreme's story will repeat infinitely. The names will change, the faces will differ, but the narrative remains constant. Bright young men in forgotten communities, offered only suffering or crime, choosing crime, building empires, and eventually falling, leaving nothing but damage in their wake. Supreme is one man, but he represents millions. His choices were his own, but his circumstances were created by systems beyond his control. His crimes deserve punishment, which he received. But the systems that created him remain unpunished, still operating, still producing the next generation of Supremes who will make the same choices and face the same endings. Some men are born into kingdoms. Some build them from nothing. But Supreme, he carved his empire from the bones of his own community, crowned himself with blood, and ruled until the crown became his cage. In Queens, they remember his name, but nobody remembers what it cost. And somewhere tonight, another boy is watching, learning, believing that next time will be different. It never is.